What if one of the greatest bodybuilders of the 1990s was also one of the most misunderstood? Nasser El Sonbati's story is a tale of muscle and intellect, glory and controversy. It's a journey from a scholarly childhood to the peak of bodybuilding fame, marked by dramatic highs, puzzling lows, and a legacy that still has fans asking questions. This is Nasser El Sonbati, the misunderstood superstar. Born on October 15, 1965, in Stuttgart, Germany, to an Egyptian father and a Serbian mother, Nasser El Sonbati grew up in a richly multicultural household. He was not the typical future Mr. Olympia contender, far from it. As a youth, Nasser was academically inclined and even earned the nickname The Professor later in life for his intellect and trademark round glasses. He graduated from the University of Augsburg with a master's degree in history, political science, and sociology, and he could speak an astonishing 7 languages fluently. This blend of academic achievement and cultural background set him apart from his peers. Yet, despite his cerebral side, Nasser's early life did not point toward bodybuilding at all. In fact, young Nasser was more interested in soccer than weights. As a teenager, he lifted weights only to improve his leg strength for the soccer field. It's a surprising start for someone who would later become one of the largest professional bodybuilders of his era. Little did Nasser know that a chance encounter in the gym would soon change the course of his life, steering him from academia and soccer towards the world of iron. Nasser's journey into bodybuilding began almost by accident. One day, a former Hungarian weightlifter at his gym noticed Nasser's natural strength and potential. This mentor astutely advised the young man to train his entire body, upper and lower, rather than just doing leg workouts for soccer. At first, Nasser was reluctant. He still found the extreme muscular look unappealing, but he gave structured weight training a try, if only as another personal challenge. The results were dramatic. Within 2 years of serious lifting, Nasser's physique transformed. The once skeptical teenager became, in his own words, jacked. In 1985, urged by friends at the gym, 20-year-old Nasser entered a local junior bodybuilding competition in Germany. To his surprise, he finished 6th in his very first show. The competitive spark was lit. Here was a young man who never dreamed of posing under bright lights, now finding himself drawn to the very sport he used to scorn. From that initial taste of competition, Nasser's passion for bodybuilding grew quickly. He realized that the sport wasn't just about vanity, it was a rigorous test of discipline, determination, and personal grit. His father, however, disapproved strongly, believing bodybuilding was a frivolous pursuit of narcissistic men with no real talent. But Nasser was determined to prove otherwise. He balanced his university studies with grueling workouts, showing early signs of the relentless work ethic that would later define him. As he stood in the gym, lifting heavier and heavier weights, the once disinterested bodybuilder began to dream of bigger stages. By the late 1980s, Nasser El Sonbati had decided to take his bodybuilding journey to the next level. After several more amateur competitions, he earned his IFBB Pro card in 1990. That same year, he made a solid professional debut by cracking the top 10 in multiple IFBB Grand Prix contests. For someone who initially never destined for the stage, he was now holding his own among Europe's best. In 1993, Nasser's improvements were turning heads. His placings at European pro shows improved to 3rd in events like the Grand Prix France and Germany. His growing reputation overseas did not go unnoticed in the United States, the mecca of bodybuilding. In 1994, Nasser received an invitation to compete at the sport's most prestigious event, the Mr. Olympia in Long Beach, California. Nasser stepped onto the Olympia stage in 1994 with modest expectations from the press and fans. After all, this was his first Olympia, and he was up against legends. Yet he delivered a strong debut, finishing 7th in the world. He even beat established names like Andreas Münzer and Samir Banu, and edged out a young Ronnie Coleman. More importantly, his massive and symmetrical physique caught the eye of Joe Weider, the godfather of bodybuilding. Impressed, Weider offered Nasser a coveted Weider sponsorship contract. This deal wasn't enormously lucrative, but it was life-changing. It provided Nasser with enough financial support to train full-time and move to the United States to pursue his career. Becoming a Weider athlete also gave Nasser a stamp of legitimacy in the pro bodybuilding world. Freed from the distraction of day jobs, Nasser's progress accelerated. The mid-1990s saw him as a rising star and a crowd favorite. He was known for a freakish yet aesthetic physique, contest weight around 270 pounds of chiseled muscle, and an off-season weight weight well over 300 pounds while still showing visible abs. Fans were amazed that someone so huge could maintain a tight midsection and a balanced shape. Nasser also stood out by often posing in training with wire-rimmed glasses on, reinforcing that professor mystique even as he flexed his 21-inch arms. His contest record during these years highlights his ascent. In 1995, Nasser earned his first professional victory at the Houston Pro Invitational, and shortly after, he won the prestigious Night of Champions in New York, now known as the New York Pro. That same year, he broke into the Olympia top tier, placing third at the 1995 Mr. Olympia, an almost unheard-of jump for someone in only his second Olympia appearance. He repeated a third-place finish at the 1996 Mr. Olympia as well, firmly establishing himself as one of the world's top 3 bodybuilders 2 years in a row. However, the 1996 Olympia also came with a dark footnote. Nasser tested positive for a banned diuretic after the contest and was officially disqualified, losing his third-place finish. He had come in shredded and impressive, but the IFBB's drug testing, which was implemented for diuretics that year, caught him. The disqualification meant no trophy, no prize money, and a stain on his record, even though fans still remembered that he stood next to Dorian Yates and Sean Ray in the pose down that night. This incident foreshadowed the lengths Nasser was willing to go and the controversies that would sometimes follow him. Still, heading into 1997, Nasser was riding high as a top contender, hungry for an even bigger prize. The 1997 Mr. Olympia in Long Beach would become the most talked about night of Nasser El Sonbati's career. Going into the competition, Nasser was poised as a real threat to the reigning 6-time Mr. Olympia, Dorian Yates. Yates, the British champion known as the Shadow, had dominated the sport for years, but was physically breaking down by 1997. He arrived with a torn tricep and visible injuries that blunted his usually unbeatable presence. Nasser, on the other hand, showed up in arguably the best shape of his life, bigger yet still aesthetic, with his signature small waist and detailed muscle separation. As they stood side by side, many in the crowd felt a new champion might be crowned that night. The professor matched the mighty Yates pose for pose in sheer size, and even outshone him in certain shots due to Nasser's superior symmetry and intact muscle bellies. Yates's one trump card was his legendary back, but even that advantage was diminished by the pain limiting his posing. When the dust settled, the judges announced Dorian Yates as the winner, with Nasser El Sonbati controversially relegated to second place. Gasps and boos could be heard. It felt like déjà vu of past contentious decisions. Depending on whom you asked, it was either a heroic last stand by Yates or a robbery that denied Nasser his rightful Sando trophy. In fact, debate over that decision rages to this day among bodybuilding fans. Many of Nasser's fellow competitors and experts believed he deserved the victory. Notably, future Mr. Olympia legends like Jay Cutler and Ronnie Coleman later remarked that Nasser should have beaten Yates in '97. To them, and to a large portion of the audience in Long Beach, Nasser was the uncrowned champion that night. For Nasser himself, the outcome was devastating and would alter the course of his life. He was openly frustrated and bitter about the judging. In interviews, Nasser didn't mince words. He insisted he had the better build and better God-given genetic structure compared to Yates, highlighting that he had no torn muscles, while Yates was riddled with injuries. He felt his conditioning and symmetry were superior. In short, that he was the true winner in 1997. What made the loss even harder to swallow was the tangible cost of missing out on the title. "I got robbed for at least $5 million US," Nasser later claimed. This staggering figure was his estimate of the endorsement deals and opportunities he lost by not having Mr. Olympia attached to his name. In Nasser's view, had he won in 1997, it could have propelled him to win further Olympias in subsequent years, cementing a legacy and financial security that slipped away that night. Nasser's post-1997 comments also revealed a deep distrust of the sport's power brokers. He believed there were political reasons for his loss. He alleged that some judges didn't want Yates, a long-reigning champ and friend to many, to suffer a defeat as he exited the sport, and that perhaps the IFBB hierarchy wasn't keen on another non-American champion right after 6 years of a British one. Whether or not there's truth to these theories, they show how betrayed Nasser felt. The 1997 Olympia, intended to be his crowning glory, instead became a turning point where admiration gave way to controversy. Some fans started seeing him as a sore loser due to his outspoken resentment, while others sympathized with him as a man who dared to speak up against a system he thought was unjust. It was the beginning of Nasser El Sonbati's image as the misunderstood superstar, a man at odds with the very industry in which he excelled. To build a physique as massive as Nasser's, pure training and diet can only take one so far. Nasser competed in the 1990s mass monster era of bodybuilding, where virtually all top athletes relied on performance-enhancing drugs to reach extreme size. He was no exception. In fact, he was quite candid about it later in his life. Nasser admitted to using anabolic steroids and other compounds throughout his career. It was simply part of the sport's reality, and he once remarked that people falsely believe steroids just create a completely different human being out of you without hard work. In other words, he acknowledged using them, but emphasized they were only one factor in his success, alongside brutal training and strict nutrition. Nasser's training intensity was legendary. He was a firm believer in training to absolute failure, pushing a muscle until it could not do another rep. To make a muscle grow, you must force it to go beyond its capabilities. Train to failure, he famously said. His workouts were high volume and heavy, pounded the weights relentlessly, often doing squat, bench presses, and other big lifts for 20+ reps with astonishing weight. This work ethic, combined with copious calories and supplementation, allowed him to pack on muscle mass that hardly seemed human. Off-season, he walked around at 300 to 315 pounds, yet still looked more like an off-season NFL lineman than an out-of-shape person, a testament to how much muscle he carried. His diet and supplementation were equally strict. Nasser believed in consistency and extreme discipline. He consumed enormous amounts of protein, beef, chicken, fish, and downed countless protein shakes, amino acid supplements, and vitamins to fuel his growth. He was so strict that he wouldn't allow even the smallest dietary indulgences. In fact, one oft-cited anecdote is that Nasser refused to put any seasoning on his food and drank nothing but water, no sauces, no juices, nothing that might add unwanted sodium or sugar. This Spartan approach to eating was part of what he felt was necessary to sculpt a championship body. Of course, the chemical side of bodybuilding loomed large as well. Insulin, human growth hormones, testosterone derivatives. The 90s were an escalating arms race of pharmacology, and Nasser was competing against men who were pushing those boundaries, meaning he likely had to push them too. He even dabbled in the business of steroids at times. In one interview, Nasser revealed that he had provided fellow pro Milos Sarcev with steroids and was frustrated that Milos never paid him the $2,550 owed for them. This little revelation shows how entrenched the drug culture was. Even top athletes sometimes bartered and traded these substances behind the scenes. Nasser's willingness to go all out helped him reap more victories. In 1997 and 1998, he took second place at the Arnold Classic, and in 1999, he finally won the Arnold Classic title, defeating elite competitors like Kevin Levrone. That Arnold Classic win in '99 was the biggest title of his career, a sweet redemption after the Olympia frustrations. But by the late 90s, years of extreme dieting, training, and drug use were accumulating a toll beneath the surface. Nasser kept chasing the Mr. Olympia title, but his placings declined. Third in '98, sixth in '99, and down to ninth and lower in the early 2000s. His enormous body, which had brought him fame, was starting to betray him. How much further could he push? Outside of competition, who was Nasser El Sonbati? Fans saw him as a juggernaut on stage, but he was a more complex character offstage. In many ways, Nasser was a loner in the bodybuilding scene. He wasn't frequently photographed buddying up with rival athletes or training in famous group sessions. This solitary approach may have been partly due to his intense focus, and perhaps partly due to feeling a bit different from his peers. With his academic background and worldly upbringing, Nasser sometimes felt like an outsider in a subculture that, at the time, wasn't known for intellectuals. However, those who met Nasser in person often came away surprised by how articulate and polite he was. He could discuss topics far beyond bodybuilding, politics, history, you name it, with insight and wit. Speaking 7 languages, he often engaged with fans across the globe in their native tongue. He split his residence between California and his home. He spent a lot of time in the US during his career, but also returned to Europe and the Middle East frequently. In fact, despite his American success, Nasser remained very connected to his roots, and he cherished his family. His mother and father and his sibling were an important part of his life. Even though his father had once opposed his bodybuilding dreams, Nasser never lost respect for education and family values. He simply also believed in chasing his own path. Nasser's personal views could be blunt, and this sometimes led to misunderstandings. He had a sarcastic sense of humor and was not afraid to call things as he saw them. While fans appreciated his honesty, some in the industry took offense. His frank talk earned him a reputation. He could come off as arrogant or bitter to those who didn't know him well. But was he truly arrogant or just brutally honest and confident? It depends whom you ask. Those close to him often say Nasser was generous and even goofy at times. He loved a good joke and didn't take himself as seriously in private as he seemed to in the media. One thing is clear, Nasser demanded respect on his own terms. He once said his trust in the bodybuilding establishment was beyond possible repair after feeling cheated in his career. That disillusionment would soon spill out very publicly. Yet even as his relationship with the IFBB powers soured, Nasser remained beloved by many fans. To a lot of enthusiasts, he was an underdog who spoke truth to power. He was the multilingual giant who could quote philosophy one minute and crack a joke in Arabic or German the next. In an industry full of colorful characters, Nasser El-Sonbati was truly unique. And as his competing days wound down, he was about to ensure that everyone heard what he really thought. Consequences be damned. After a long, competitive career, Nasser entered the 2000s with battle scars. He continued to compete until 2005, but his placements kept falling. It was evident that the Nasser of the mid-90s, round, full, and dominant, was fading. In 2005, after placing 14th at the Europa Super Show, he quietly hung up his posing trunk and retired from competition. He was 40 years old, with over 2 decades of hardcore bodybuilding behind him. However, Nasser did not fade quietly into a peaceful retirement. Instead, he took on a new role, bodybuilding's harshest critic. Starting around 2006 and peaking in 2008, he gave a series of bombshell interviews, notably a multi-part tell-all with bodybuilding.com's David Robson that sent shockwaves through the bodybuilding community. In these interviews, Nasser essentially settled scores with nearly everyone who he felt had wronged him or the sport. No one was off limits. He called out judges, officials, and fellow competitors with stinging barbs. Here he alleged that famed trainer Milos Sarcev still owed him money for steroid supplies, and he blasted Milos for allegedly getting silicone calf implants to cheat his way to better legs. He ridiculed Canadian mass monster Greg Kovacs, saying Greg was so big that he could hardly function, a dig at how unathletic and unhealthy the 400-pound Kovacs appeared. He even took personal shots at rivals. He nicknamed the outspoken Sean Ray as Chihuahua Ray, implying Sean was a yappy small dog with a Napoleonic complex. He referred to Paul Dillett, a genetic marvel with a giant but somewhat unrefined physique, as the Great Plains because of all the wide open spaces on his body. Even Arnold Schwarzenegger, sport's ultimate icon, didn't escape Nasser's scorn. Nasser admired Arnold's career, but bluntly pointed out that Arnold had weak legs, droopy shoulders, and a huge waist in his physique. Such brutally honest remarks were unheard of from a top professional talking on the record. It was as if Nasser had a lifetime of frustration built up, and now he was unloading it in a scorched earth fashion. These interviews instantly made Nasser a polarizing figure. On one hand, fans were thrilled by the candor and the behind-the-scenes dirt. It was refreshing to hear a top pro speak so openly. On the other hand, many of Nasser's peers were outraged. He violated an unwritten code of omerta in bodybuilding, openly discussing steroids and insulting colleagues. Some who used to cheer him now viewed him as an angry, bitter ex-star lashing out. Nasser didn't seem to care. He felt vindicated. In his mind, he was simply telling the uncomfortable truth. Meanwhile, as all this drama played out publicly, Nasser's health was deteriorating privately. Years of extreme steroid use, high-calorie diets, and the physical strain of carrying 300+ pounds had ravaged his body's systems. He suffered a severe staph infection in his shoulder toward the end of his career, an infection so bad it nearly killed him and required multiple surgeries to clean out. During that scare, gossip spread that it might have been caused by improperly using synthol or site enhancement oil in his shoulder, since such infections can happen from injection. Nasser, for his part, denied ever using synthol with disgust, insisting he didn't need any oil to make his delts look huge. By the early 2000s and 10s, Nasser was a shadow of his former self physically. He had slimmed down considerably from his competitive days, which is common for retired bodybuilders, but in Nasser's case, it was partly due to serious illness. He was suffering from kidney failure and severe heart issues. His heart had enlarged and was not pumping well. Friends reported that Nasser was on dialysis for his kidneys and in need of a heart transplant by 2012. Tragically, he did not qualify for a transplant, perhaps because his overall health and prognosis were too poor. Knowing his time was limited, Nasser chose to spend his final days back in Egypt with his family, where he felt most at peace. On March 20th, 2013, Nasser El-Sonbati died in his sleep in Cairo. He was only 47 years old. The news of his death shook the bodybuilding world. Fans and former competitors flooded forums and social media media with tribute, disbelief, and yes, renewed debates about his legacy. It was a sad and jarring moment. One of bodybuilding's giants, both in physique and personality, was gone far too soon.